Well, first of all, how are you?
I'm good. I'm sort of in the middle of talking about two different movies at the same time, so sometimes I get whiplash.
I
So
noticed this. I saw on Twitter, it's just like Soho, Soho. Thanks for chatting about with me about Soho, Edgar Wright. And I'm like, oh, I'm talking about Sparks. But it's kind of fun, I guess, though, because it's two passions. It's like, let me create some nonsense on the one hand, and here's the other thing I love. Like, what does everyone think of it?
yeah, I mean, wait, which one's the nonsense?
Oh no, no, just well, that's a good point. But no, I mean like the fiction, when
Oh,
you're
I see.
creating out a whole cloth, like here's some shit in my brain that I hope other people like. And then here's things in real life that I hope people like. It's very much, it seems very you, just like here's the things I like and are interested in. What does everyone think?
I guess so. I mean, listen, I mean, films should be passion projects.
Yeah.
Whenever you say, like, whenever a filmmaker says, "Oh, this one's a real passion project for me," the reality is they should all be passion projects. Because if you don't, it's such a, these things like, using that word or using the word labor of love. It's true because, like, if it's like so much work goes into both films. Like that, if you don't really love it, you shouldn't really be doing it at all. And this was something that kind of, I guess, it came into my head, the idea of doing it like 4 years ago. And that was the first time I spoke to Ronald Russell about the idea of doing it. And it came about because it wasn't like it's funny, like having now made the movie and, having had a good response to it, is I didn't really set out to be a documentary director in terms, it wasn't something that was in my bucket list necessarily of things to do. Much as I really love, the kind of the genre. I guess genre is a weird word for documentaries,
Yeah.
but I mean, I love watching documentaries, and I particularly love music documentaries because I'm a big music fan. And I'd start to sort of say aloud, somebody should do a documentary about Sparks. Why hasn't somebody done a documentary about Sparks? Like, Sparks are the most influential band that don't have a documentary about them. I've seen documentaries about bands that are 20th as important as Sparks. So I'd started saying this aloud to my friends. And then eventually it was Phil Lord, the director, was the person who called me on it at a Sparks gig in 2017, literally about 4 years ago. Right now, it was in October 2017. We were standing in the balcony just before a Sparks gig, and I was doing my usual rant about the fact that nobody had made a Sparks documentary. And he goaded me because he said, "You should make the Sparks documentary." And I guess I just responded, in a very knee-jerk way. I said, "Yeah, I will." And then that night, I saw Ron Russell after the gig. By this point, I'd been friends with him for a couple of years, and I said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." So I called him on the phone and asked him about it. What I didn't know at that point, I didn't know that they'd previously been approached about doing the documentaries and had said no. And so I think the reason they said yes to me was that they knew me, number one, they liked my films, and they thought, well, if we ever do one, maybe this is the time to do it, or the right person to do it with. So I was very flattered by that. I wasn't really aware that they'd, kind of resisted previous overtures.
I mean, it's funny to me just because on the one hand, it takes someone going, you are a director. You could make this, oh, I could, shit, you're right, I do this for a living. And then them who, honestly, my main introduction to them, besides like knowing the name, was Annette, and realizing that they're very cinematic in their, just the way they think as musicians is kind of as if it's a movie. So it makes sense that they would be like, well, it's not that we don't want this done, but we're not just going to let anyone. Like, there's a lot of music documentaries that are totally fine, but if you don't love the band, you're going to get nothing out of them. Like, and these are huge bands, but just if you don't already connect with Tom Petty, whoever, it's harder because the love that someone has doesn't always translate. It's the way that I feel like girls used to look at me on dates when I would talk about Springsteen. I could just tell it's not translating. I'm like, all right, I get it. But you have such a very like playful approach to it, and that here's something I love. I want you to love it too, but let's see how I can get you to love it. And
Well,
them.
you're absolutely right. And if I had one kind of criticism of some music documentaries, and these are even ones I like, is sometimes some music documentaries assume that you're already a fan. and they don't kind of necessarily like let in new fans, or rather they don't let in kind of newcomers to it. And sometimes I remember, I won't mention any names of documentaries, it was a documentary about a band that I like, and I like the documentary, but I noticed that just like they just talked all the way through the hits, and I thought, if you were an 18-year-old who had never heard this band before and had never heard this song before, let them hear the song. Like, and I think with Sparks, the thing was great going into it is one had to assume that the film had to work for people who were like diehard Sparks fans, people who knew a little about Sparks, but not a lot, of which there are a lot of people like that, and people who never heard of Sparks. So I needed the film to work on all levels. And so in a way, it's as much an introduction as it is a celebration.
Oh yeah. And it's even harder, I think, for someone who's a named filmmaker. Like, sorry, you're famous, deal with it. There are people who are going to watch the movie just because you made it, and they, Sparks, oh, it must be a weed documentary. Well, however they're, approaching it, they don't know what the hell you make, but they want to watch it. So yeah, you have to grab them in a different way. And I think that's why that little Q&A opening is so genius, because if you love them, you're going, oh shit, this is definitely their personality. And if you don't know who the hell they are, you go, well, now I got to know why. Like, I'm in. Like, let's do this.
Well, I think that the key thing for me was not having made a documentary before. The thing that I really wanted to do was make the film in the tone of Sparks themselves. And in a way that was quite kind of easy, because I realized, having gotten to know them over the last, like, I guess, 5 years, 6 years, is that I think one of the reasons maybe it's two things. I mean, I feel like I have a similar sensibility and sense of humor to them. And in a weird way, it's not to say that, oh, we get on because we have the same sense of humor. You start to think, wait, I've been a fan of this band for years. Maybe they've helped me form my sense of humor.
Yeah.
So things like that, like the frequently asked questions sequence at the start, or even just like knowing them and knowing like their perspective and their sense of humor. Hopefully just me doing all the interviews as well was disarming, in the sense of, it's not like you're taking kind of like a more formal, even aggressive, like sort of like, like sort of approach to the interviews. I was sort of interviewing them like I would be sitting around, the same things I would ask over dinner that, that I would ask them in a studio format. And that sort of extended to all of the interviews, really, is that at a certain point, even when you're sitting there opposite, like Duran Duran, you're essentially like, at a certain point, you're just talking like three Sparks fans. And that was kind of sweet. So, yeah.
It's true. And it's what gives it also one.
I finished my thought there. I thought there was more to that sentence.
No, it's fun. You edited yourself. You get 2 paychecks now. No, there's something about like knowing it's your version of this style and reflects your personality, but also feels like the conversation it would be having, because it is weird when you hear like the very formal, rigid questions, but that's not how people talk, and that's not even like, like you said, you could be talking with someone who's just a huge star, but you're talking about something you're both interested in. You're inevitably going to just start talking about it like fans, and that's way more interesting. I would always rather hear, no matter who's talking. I could be talking to like Obama, but I want, if he starts talking about the Bulls, I'm like, oh, now we're just talking about people who like basketball. The sort of like veneer of this is an important person, pay attention, turns into just like, this is a person with something to say.
Sorry, my phone went off. I'm just turning it off. Sorry.
Someone else has something to say. It's Obama going, why is he
Greg, if you're on, tell Naira that I'm doing an interview.
Exactly. But no, I think everything that you hit on is true. It's just
that, to answer your question, I think the other thing in talking to them is I knew them well enough in terms of like what they would be like in an interview, in the sense of they're very modest. So there's things where like having it becoming more of an oral history than just an interview with them was important to me. Because their reach is so far in terms of the people that they've worked with, the people who were fans of the band that went on to be successful artists. so that there were so many people you could talk to about Sparks, but also I knew that the things that they wouldn't say out loud, that you need somebody to say it for them, you could go to somebody else talking about it, because they're very modest, and also, you know, they've managed to kind of maintain an air of like an enigmatic quality for over 50 years. And I wanted to get the story from them and still honor that air of mystery. And so that was something we talked about as we were going through the interviews. So I think sort of with Ron and Russell, I probably interviewed them for like 9 hours, like over the course of like 4 sessions. And what was funny to me is there were sort of some things, and at the start of it, the only thing that they said, because there was something where they want to talk to me, they want to tell the story. And what I really wanted to give is give people the overview of the band. It's like, where did they come from? What influenced them growing up? Like, where are they from? What influences came into their music? And then not only tell their story, but then show who they influenced, which is like a massive like family tree going on forever. And obviously, even if you've never heard of Sparks, you've heard of the artists that they influenced. Sure. And that's why a lot of them are in the movie. And then what was funny is that the only thing that was off the table when we talked about it is they said, we don't really want to talk about relationships. That's not something that we've ever talked about in the press, and we don't want to change that now. And I really respect that, because I think sometimes with some kind of music documentaries, the kind of the almost like tabloid soap opera elements start to outweigh the story of the art. And I think sometimes there are some bands where, you know, it threatens to kind of like become their legacy. Like a band like Oasis, I feel like the first thing that you think of when you think about them is that the brothers hate each other's guts. Yeah. Or you think about that with Fleetwood Mac, you sort of start to get bogged down in all the interpersonal relationships rather than just the music. And the fact that Ron and Russell didn't, you know, wanted to concentrate on the work was great. But then what was funny to me, and some of my favorite bits in the documentary, is where they can't quite help talking about personal stuff, and the sort of diplomatic veneer of some of their answers breaks down into smirks when one of them is obviously, there's a particular bit is my favorite bit in the documentary where Russell is talking in a very diplomatic way about a previous relationship, which his bandmates aren't, and Todd Rundgren isn't. But when Russell starts saying, well, we became friends with Miss Christine, and like Ron is in the 2 shot starting to smirk and says, we did? He goes, oh, let me back up. I became friends with Miss Christine. And the fact that they let me keep that in the movie, it says everything about them, is that they, even though it was breaking one of their rules, they understood that it was funny and charming and revealing and worth keeping in.
That actually leads into the editing question I have, though I will just say, when I think of Oasis, I think of becoming a fan of them in high school to try to get a girl to like me. So, you know, we all have our thing.
Come up twice now. I'm interested in your dating history.
There wasn't a whole lot left, but just to sort of wrap up, when you edit this, you're editing with people's lives. You know, when you edit one of your fiction films, you know, when it's narrative, it's just about like making the movie as tight as you can. It's what you feel is the version of the movie you want to see. Here, there's that, but it's also just you want them to feel represented, and it's not their film, it's your film. But like obviously, like you said, if you kept that and they didn't want it to. You know, it's doing that when you don't want that. That's not the feeling you want. So I'm just curious how the editing is different, because I know we're running out of time.
I showed them an early cut, and they, you know, they loved it, and they had very, very few notes, and the very few things that they brought up, it was not a big problem for me to kind of like address. It wasn't at any point that there was any you know, that was the nice thing, is they kind of left me to make it. They were very helpful in terms of obviously full access, you know, and they're also kind of helping with the archive stuff. There's like tons of personal archive stuff in there. But in terms of the edit, they just left me to it. And then I showed them the movie, and I think they were just genuinely overwhelmed with it, which was really nice. I think the thing in terms of the edit, the thing for me that was something that was important to do, and maybe, you know, is that, you know, it's a 50-year story. And also with Sparks, maybe unlike some other artists, to me, the misses are as important, if not more important than the hits sometimes. It'd be disingenuous to skip over albums that didn't do so well, because usually the albums that didn't do well, that triggers some kind of like change of plan, or it triggers like the next phase. And so in other documentaries, you might kind of just concentrate on the hits. And if there was like a flop album, we'll just skip over that.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was important to tell the whole story, because the things that kind of miss are like sometimes the most fascinating bits.
For sure. And I think it shows. And I know we're running out of time, so I just want to congratulate you on this, because like I said, I didn't really know much about him beyond hearing about him. And I thought it was great. I thought it was so loving and reflected how you personally feel about them. And that's what I think people want out of these things. So I think mission accomplished, and that's exciting. And like you said, everything should be a passion project, and you've put your money where your mouth is. You've quit movies that you no longer felt that was the case. And that's, it shows in the work that this is what I care about. This is what I want to be spending my time on. And you should be very proud of it.
Thank you very much. That's very nice to hear.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure.
No worries. Of course.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me stop the recording now. Thanks again.
And then at the end of the thing, you put Last Night in Soho comes out October 29th.
I got you.